Let me start here with Mr. Worthington here with me in the studio. When people talk about the country's integrated energy plan in simple language, what are they talking about?
Well, we're talking about a plan for the long term for how we provide energy services throughout the economy and throughout society. So what distinguishes an integrated energy plan from simple supply-side plans is that you look at all of the energy needs, all of the services that are required by industry, by business, by households, and then working back from the demand side, you look at what the optimal ways are of supplying those services. So demand-side management, energy efficiency of appliances, all of these things looking at demand. Then you work your way back, what are the most appropriate energy carriers, whether it's electricity, gas, maybe for some people it is paraffin, but for some other people it might be conversion of renewable resources on site into gas or electricity, and you work your way back up the chain. So you don't simply assume we've got lots of fossils, we should burn them. You look at what the energy service needs are and then the optimal way to supply energy into the system to meet all of those needs. And you look at how that is integrated within the whole of the economy and society. So the impacts on jobs, for example, really important. The impact on the prospects for investment, long-term competitiveness in a global economy, and obviously climate change and the prospects of carbon taxes internationally is one of the things we need to look at there. And of course, human welfare. So what are the impacts on human welfare? What does air pollution mean for the cost burden on the state of providing healthcare services? So it's an integrated look at all of those things to come up with the optimal way of providing energy services.
Just very briefly, what are the implications of not having one?
Well, then we wind up doing ad hoc things like saying we've got lots of coal, let's burn it as quickly as possible because that's what we've done before. Or you say, well, liquid fuels, if we can nationalize that, we reduce the cost of oil import, but you forget to look at the prospects of electrifying transport. And with electric motors being 3 times more efficient on average than the internal combustion engine, that whole option for efficiency and reducing one's use of finite resources can be overlooked. That's why you need integrated planning.
Mr. Apane, where is South Africa's integrated energy plan?
South Africa does not have an approved integrated energy plan as we speak. Instead, what has been approved and is currently being implemented is what we call the integrated resource plan. So basically, it's a subset of the integrated energy plan that Richard is talking about. The intention is that by about next year, we would be in a position to conclude on the integrated energy plan.
All right. So you say we only have an integrated resource plan and that is a subset. In other words, you're saying that what we should have first is an integrated energy plan under which then we have an integrated resource plan.
Gary, let's just put that into perspective, right? What happens is that there is a reality on the ground, right? We have always been, an energy-intensive economy. We have, shall we say, defaulted to certain preferences, particular fossil fuels and so on. So the transition from, if you like, a bottoms-up approach to energy planning and energy utilization is what we're dealing with right now. So we had always had plans at the lower level, like without necessarily having an umbrella one that appropriates all of these energy carriers and options in a manner that is, if you like, is sustainable and aligned with governance.
All right. And you say we should have a plan by when?
By next year.
That implies that the process is underway then to put it together.
Yes. Basically, what has happened is that the process has been underway for perhaps the last 3 years or so. And last year or the year before, when the integrated resource plan process was kick-started, one of the biggest criticisms that we faced was that perhaps we needed to do the integrated energy plan first. But the problem is, like I've indicated, is that we've got this reality that, there had to be a plan in the electricity space, right, so as to keep the lights burning, right? And we're not suggesting that it's the most ideal of approaches, but under the circumstances, with the reality on the ground is that we had to conclude on, a draft integrated resource plan that then determines which power stations we're going to build, and we believe that can, be factored into an integrated
All right. Let me ask the professor. I'm going to come back to you, but I just would like to get an international overview of putting together these plans, Professor. Firstly, what should be the important components of a plan such as this that we are working on in South Africa?
Well, I think Richard summarized it well, but let me stress one thing. It's the integration aspect. Certainly, as Richard mentioned, you have in each of the subsectors, like, for example, electricity, you have the supply consideration. Should you go for coal? Should you go for nuclear? Should you go for renewables? But you also have the demand side. Who is using energy most? Households, industry, and so on, transport for liquid fuels. And you have to match the supply and the demand side. And that is a complex integration. It also involves pricing policy, because the prices of different fuels mean that they are used in different ways, and there are incentives or barriers and so on. And you have to also take into account the poor, that you you make sure that their basic needs are met, and the energy forms are affordable, but at the same time you can't give away energy at subsidized prices, because then the supply entities will go bankrupt. So it's a complicated process even at the subsector level. But then you have to integrate across the whole of the energy sector. You have to see what is the interaction, for example, between electricity and coal. What you do in mining will be affected by the needs of the electricity sector. What happens with renewables? Where do they plug in to the grid? What the issue with oil and transport and so on. And then you have to link up the energy sector with the rest of the macroeconomy, because there are other departments like agriculture, industry, transport, and so on, which are the users of energy. And finally, you have to integrate with the international scene, because the international oil price or the coal price or the price of renewable technology will affect what you're doing in South Africa. So integration is extremely important, and IEP is a systematic process that forces the planners to think of every step. So you cannot ad hoc. And your earlier question is basically that if you don't do integrated energy planning, then you have an ad hoc approach, and you might pick the right solution, but you also might pick the wrong solution. Thank you.
But here's the point, Professor, that I would like to pick up on, because obviously this issue touches right across the social strata. But it does sound quite technological and very techy for an ordinary person. To what extent should ordinary people be involved?
I think transparency is a very important consideration, and the informed public are, in fact, a huge support for this process.
Let me ask Mr. Apane then. The central message from what we're hearing from the professor is that there should be transparency. You say this process has been going on for a number of years. Are you convinced that it's been transparent?
Let me clarify. What happened is that the integrated resource plan was actually put out for public comment around 2003 or 4, thereabouts. I mean, this is like a good 8 years ago, right? And some of the weaknesses that had been identified in that process are precisely what the professor is talking about, the fact that there might have been, space for more consultation, and the process could have been a little bit more transparent and so on, without going through this process.
But let me ask you about this other element that everyone seems to be bringing up, the element of job creation, for instance. How can an energy plan be used to assist in job creation?
Look, and I'm glad that you raised this point, Solani, is that those are some of the strategic considerations that the professor talks to. That it is not just a question of putting a plan in place without any, alignment with what government wants to achieve in the economy generally, because, energy plays a very significant role like in the economy specifically, but also in relation to job creation generally. And one has to do those things that in the main would drive the job creation, objective. And that's why I keep harping on this point about us having to be careful not to get too lost in planning processes, even to the extent that we risk losing jobs whilst we at this planning thing. So there are certain practical things that, to bode well for job creation. Like, for example, we've launched the renewable energy program, and that will, create the jobs that we need.
Richard, what are your thoughts around job creation? Does it compromise perhaps the kind of plan that we end up having? In other words, we look for these low-hanging fruits at the expense of what could be perhaps a sustainable long-term plan?
No, fortunately, there's good alignment there, and it's great to hear the Department of Energy recognizing that renewable energy is key to job creation. The statistics internationally show that per unit of investment, renewables offer far more jobs than the more concentrated forms of energy like fossil and nuclear fuels. It's good to hear the Department of Energy recognizing that, and that is why we need to be looking at jobs within an integrated energy plan. We've recently seen some really fanciful figures projecting numbers of possible jobs if we can secure gas in the Karoo, if it's there in the first place. It's only estimated, and if we can get it out from 5 kilometres underground, we're now told it's going to generate massive numbers of jobs. Those projections by project proponents are meaningless. We have to look at these issues within a plan looking at the entire energy system, because then the greater labour intensity of certain options like renewables is clearly weighed up in a proper plan, and not just projections by people punting a particular technology option or wanting to go exploring for more fossil resources, which, concentrated energy gives you concentrated wealth, high profits. So there is a tension between profits for investors in a sustainable energy plan versus the long-term cost of energy supply to the people that need it, to society as a whole. So the tensions are not between job creation and sustainability. No, they are wonderfully aligned. The tensions are between getting returns on your investment in the short term while making sensible long-term investments that will manage the long-term prices of electricity, because the social side that Prof. Mohan mentioned is pricing. And at the moment, we hear a lot about we shouldn't let the pricing go too high. What we should be discussing is the fact that at the moment, industry, commercial processes receive energy much more cheaply than people in poverty. So differential pricing for different kinds of customers needs to be considered within an integrated energy planning process. At the moment, we see big business saying you can't allow the price of electricity to go too high because the poor won't be able to afford it. Well, let them speak for themselves, thank you very much, and let the poor speak for themselves within an integrated energy planning process.
Mr. Apane, please respond particularly to the, because there was a report of a nuclear tender out, 300 billion.
Yeah.
What is the logic behind that?
So, Larry, there is no tender for nuclear at all. We can have a lot of, discussion around the nuclear program.